His ideas were not fashionable, nobody seemed to listen to him, nobody seemed to agree with him. He was alone.
Hayek found his ideas shunned by the academic world.
Well, most of the departments came to dislike me, so much so that I can feel it to the present day. That economists very largely tend to treat me as an outsider.
He was living in a provincial town and stuck in a rut. But the outside world was beginning to change. Skimming the newspaper in his usual restaurant, Hayek read how inflation and unemployment were rising at the same time. There was a new word to describe it: stagflation. After 30 glorious years of growth, the American economy was in trouble.
The economy basically was kind of going nowhere and had inflation, which didn't seem to get cured, and kind of a malaise in the economy.
Stagflation was the end of naive Keynesianism. You had two things at the same time, which under the Keynesian view would have been impossible. You had stagnation in the economy, a high level of unemployment. You had inflation with prices rising rapidly.
President Nixon looked like a Chicago economist's dream come true. Milton Friedman was a special advisor, and George Shultz was in charge of the budget.
About the wholesale price index a moment ago. One of the big areas where prices were going up at wholesale very rapidly was lumber and other materials associated with home building.
But the president wasn't listening. He tried to spend his way out of trouble.
Going to wind up having its impact on the cost.
To add insult to injury, he declared, "Now I'm a Keynesian."
This declaration by Nixon horrified his conservative supporters. Indeed, one congressman wrote him, said, "Mr. President, I'm going to have to burn all of my old speeches." And Nixon wrote back to him, "I will too."
Nixon decided he hadn't gone far enough. So he took his top economic advisors off to Camp David for a working weekend. Ben Stein, the quiz show host, was a junior speechwriter in the White House, and his father was at the meeting.
Here's my father walking into the president's cabin to meet Mr. Nixon, and there's George Shultz right behind him. I'm not sure, but I think it's a fair bet that at any one of these meetings, they're complaining about something being wrong. Probably talking about prices and stagflation. I'm not sure.
Dick Cheney was a young aide at the time.
I always remember a debate we had during the Nixon administration when the public was convinced that food prices were going up. So the political debate was whether or not we should impose a freeze on food prices.
The supposedly conservative Republican Nixon opted for wage and price controls.
Nixon was a great one for doing something. I think, in retrospect, we now know it would have been better to do nothing, but he was in favor of doing something.
I was there, and I opposed them. Wage and price controls, you could see analytically, would get you in a lot of trouble.
The time has come for a new economic policy for the United States. Its targets are unemployment, inflation.
At one point, President Nixon spoke up and quoted Nikita Khrushchev. And he said, Khrushchev once told me that sometimes in order to be a statesman, you have to be a politician for a while.
The problem with him was that he was willing to sacrifice principle too easily for political advantage.
The voters liked the president's war on prices. Nixon was reelected in a landslide. The economy did less well.
Right away, the economy went out of whack. People couldn't cover their costs. Ranchers stopped sending cattle to market. Farmers started drowning their chickens. Instead of controlling inflation, they were creating shortages.
And prices just kept on rising.
The last time I saw Nixon in the Oval Office was George Shultz. President Nixon said to me, "Don't blame George for this silly business of wage and price control," meaning George Shultz. And I said to him, "Oh no, Mr. President, I don't blame George. I blame you."
Britain's mixed economy, so widely imitated, was in similar trouble. It too was facing the deadly combination of unemployment and inflation. In theory, the Conservative Prime Minister Ted Heath and his cabinet believed in markets. In practice, like Nixon, they made a sharp U-turn and used wage and price controls to combat stagflation.
I was a junior minister in Ted Heath's government, and I remember having to attend meetings of 3 or 4 other ministers where we would actually decide the level of charges plumbers could charge next week to repair taps, and how much taxi drivers could charge for fares, and how much hairdressers should get in wages. It was absolutely unbelievable. It all came to a very sticky end, a complete collapse.
A coal miners' strike and an oil crisis plunged the country into darkness. Voters blamed Ted Heath and voted the Conservatives out of office.
Well, we're virtually out of business while the power's off. We've got no sets that we can operate at all.
We were the sick man of Europe. The English disease was the disease of strikes, which we had all over the place. And you know, it was so bad that Herman Kahn of the Hudson Institute wrote a book called The Year 2000. And he saw many things, but the one thing he did see was that the lower standard of living in Europe in the year 2000 would be shared between Albania and the United Kingdom. Albania?
A minister in the defeated government, Keith Joseph may have been an unworldly intellectual, but his search for fresh answers would change the way not only Britain, but the world thought about economics and society.